Let me tell you about a specific kind of vulnerability that most people try to hide. It's not weakness. It's not being overly dramatic. It's not a lack of emotional control. It's tears that come without permission, emotion that surfaces before you can stop it, a response so immediate and so visible that you can't pretend it isn't happening. If you cry easily, you know this experience intimately. You know what it's like when tears start forming and you're desperately trying to hold them back, when your throat tightens and your vision blurs, and you know everyone can see exactly what's happening. You know what it's like to cry during arguments when you want to seem strong, during movies when everyone else stays composed, during conversations that shouldn't be emotional but somehow are, during moments that catch you off guard and open something in you that immediately overflows. You know what it's like when people misunderstand your tears, when they think you're manipulating, when they tell you to toughen up, when they treat your emotional responsiveness like a flaw that needs fixing, and you probably spent years feeling ashamed of it, apologizing for crying, fighting against your own nature, wishing you could just keep it together like everyone else seems to. Here's what I want you to understand. Crying easily is not a weakness. It's not immaturity. It's not something broken in you that needs repair. It's a different emotional threshold, a different nervous system, a different way of processing the world that's not better or worse than others, just different. And if you've ever been told you're too sensitive, if you've ever felt embarrassed by tears you couldn't control, if you've ever wondered why your emotions live so close to the surface when others seem to keep theirs buried deep, stay here. Because what you're about to understand isn't just about crying, it's about what those tears mean, what they reveal about how you experience the world, and why the depth that makes you cry so easily is the same depth that makes you remarkable. Here's what's actually happening when someone cries easily. Their emotional threshold is lower than average, not because they're weak, but because they're wired for heightened emotional responsiveness. Neuroscientists have found that people who cry easily often have differences in how their brains process emotional stimuli. Their limbic system, the part of the brain responsible for emotional processing, is more reactive. This doesn't mean their emotions are more intense than others. It means their pathway from feeling to expression is shorter, more direct, less filtered. Most people have a longer processing time between feeling an emotion and expressing it physically. They feel something, their brain processes it, decides how to respond, and then maybe, eventually tears come if the emotion is strong enough and prolonged enough. But for people who cry easily, that pathway is compressed. They feel something and the tears start immediately. There's no buffer, no processing time, no opportunity to decide whether to cry or not. The tears just come. And this is physiological, not psychological. It's about how their nervous system is structured, about the sensitivity of their tear ducts, about hormone levels that affect emotional expression, particularly prolactin, which is higher in people who cry more frequently. So when someone who cries easily tries to stop crying, they're not just fighting their emotions, they're fighting their biology, their body's automatic response to emotional stimulation. And that's an exhausting battle that they almost never win. Here's what often shapes this tendency. Some people are simply born this way. Even as infants, they were more emotionally expressive, more reactive to stimuli, more likely to cry than other babies. It's temperament, part of their inherent nature, not something that was created by experience, but something they came into the world carrying. But for others, it develops through experience, through childhoods where emotions were the only language that got attention, where crying was how you communicated need because words weren't enough or weren't heard, or through trauma that left the nervous system sensitized. That made the emotional threshold lower because the system is already on high alert, already primed to respond to threat, and sometimes tears are the response. or through environments where emotional expression was actually safe, where crying was allowed, even encouraged, where being sensitive wasn't punished but accepted. These people learn that tears are okay, that emotional expression is natural, so they never developed the suppression mechanisms that others did, never learned to push feelings down and keep them hidden. Whatever the origin, the result is the same. A person whose emotions are immediately visible, whose internal experiences become external before they can be controlled or concealed. Here's what life looks like when you cry easily. Constant management, constant awareness that your emotions might betray you at any moment, constant preparation for the embarrassment of public tears. You avoid certain movies because you know they'll make you cry. You dread serious conversations because you know you'll cry during them. You hate arguments because the tears will come and people will think you're using them as manipulation when you're just responding to intensity. You develop strategies, looking up to keep tears from falling, biting your cheek to redirect the sensation, breathing techniques that sometimes work and sometimes don't, excusing yourself to bathrooms where you can cry privately and try to recover before returning. You apologize constantly. I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm crying. I'm fine. Really, I just cry easily. Please ignore this. I can't help it. You watch other people stay composed in situations that would have you sobbing, and you wonder what's wrong with you. Why can't you just keep it together? Why do your emotions have to be so visible? Why can't you just feel things privately like everyone else seems to? And the shame builds, because society treats visible emotion as weakness, as lack of control, as something embarrassing that should be hidden. So you feel defective, like you're failing at basic emotional regulation, like everyone else got a manual on how to be a functional adult and you missed that day. But here's what that shame misses. You're not failing at emotional regulation, you're just regulating differently. Your emotions don't need as much suppression because your system was never designed to suppress them in the first place. Here's what people who cry easily often possess: extraordinary empathy. The ability to feel with others in ways that most people can't access. Because the same sensitivity that makes you cry easily also makes you acutely attuned to emotional nuance. You pick up on things others miss, the shift in someone's voice, the sadness behind their smile, the pain they're trying to hide. You don't just observe emotions, you absorb them, feel them as if they're your own, and that capacity for feeling creates tears. You cry at weddings because you're genuinely moved by love, at funerals because you're truly feeling the loss, at movies because you're emotionally invested in characters who don't even exist. You cry when others share their pain because you're not just sympathizing from a distance, you're actually experiencing a version of their suffering. Your mirror neurons are firing so intensely that their emotions become yours. This is a gift, even though it doesn't always feel like one, even though it's exhausting and embarrassing and makes you feel too much all the time. Because most people struggle to truly connect with others' emotions. They understand intellectually, but don't feel viscerally. They can be kind without being moved. But you're moved by everything. And that means your connections are deeper. Your compassion is real. Your care isn't performed. It's felt. The tears are just the visible evidence of that depth. Here's the social cost of crying easily. People misunderstand you. Constantly. They think your tears are manipulation, that you're crying to win arguments or gain sympathy, that you're weaponizing emotion to get your way. But that's not what's happening. You're not choosing to cry. You're not using tears strategically. You're just responding to emotional intensity in the only way your body knows how. The tears come whether they help or hurt you, whether they make situations better or worse. They're not tactical, they're automatic. But people don't believe this because they have control over their tears. They can choose whether to cry, so they assume you can too. They assume if you're crying, it must be deliberate. And this assumption damages relationships, makes people trust you less, makes them think you're less stable, less rational, less capable than you actually are. They see tears and think emotional instability. They see crying and think you can't handle stress. They see your sensitivity and mistake it for fragility. But crying easily doesn't mean you're fragile. It doesn't mean you can't handle difficult things. It just means you feel them while you're handling them. You can cry and still be strong. Cry and still be capable. Cry and still do hard things. The tears don't negate your resilience. They're just the soundtrack to it. Here's what people who cry easily need others to understand. Tears are not a request for anything. They're not asking you to fix the problem. They're not demanding comfort or attention. They're not a signal that the conversation needs to stop. They're just happening, like breathing, like blinking, just a physiological response to internal experience. When someone who cries easily is having a serious conversation and the tears start, they don't need you to stop talking. They don't need you to comfort them. They don't need you to treat them like they're breaking. They just need you to continue, to keep engaging with them as if the tears aren't there, to understand that crying and thinking are not mutually exclusive, that they can be emotional and rational simultaneously. The worst thing you can do is make the tears the focus. Are you okay? Do you need a minute? Why are you crying? Because those questions force them to manage your discomfort with their tears on top of managing the tears themselves. They have to reassure you that they're fine, explain something they can't control, make you comfortable with something that's just part of how they function. The best thing you can do is continue the conversation, acknowledge the tears if you must, but don't stop everything because of them. Let them cry and talk, cry and think, cry and be fully present despite the tears. Because that's what they're trying to do anyway, and your comfort with their discomfort makes it easier. Here's the internal experience of someone who cries easily. It's not just the tears, it's everything that comes with them. The physical sensations that signal tears are coming, the tightness in the throat, the burning in the nose, the pressure building behind the eyes, and the desperate attempt to stop them, the fight against your own body, the clenching, the swallowing, the looking up, the breathing carefully, anything to hold them back, because you know what's coming, you know how people will react, you know the embarrassment, the misunderstanding, the way everything will shift once the tears appear. So you fight, even though fighting makes it worse, even though resistance often makes the tears flow harder once they finally break through. And when they do break through, there's defeat, resignation, the knowledge that you've lost this battle again, that your emotions are visible again, that you're going to have to deal with the aftermath again. But there's also relief, because holding back tears requires enormous energy, and once they flow, that energy is released, the pressure dissipates, the body does what it needed to do. So crying is simultaneously humiliating and relieving, unwanted and necessary, something you fight against and something that helps once you stop fighting. Here's what people who cry easily often develop: incredible emotional intelligence, because they're forced to understand their emotions deeply, to track them, to predict them, to manage them constantly. They know their triggers, know what will make them cry, know which conversations to avoid, which movies to skip, which situations will overwhelm them. They've mapped their emotional landscape in detail because they have to. Because their emotions are so visible, they need to understand them to survive socially. And this awareness makes them remarkable at understanding others' emotions too. Because they've done so much work on their own internal world, they can navigate others with unusual skill. They become the people others come to with problems, the ones who truly listen, who don't just hear words but feel the emotions behind them, who offer comfort that's real because their empathy is real. Crying that feels like a curse in their own life becomes a gift in others' lives. The sensitivity that embarrasses them becomes the thing that helps others feel seen. Here's what I want you to know: if you cry easily, your tears are not a flaw. They're not evidence of weakness or instability or inability to cope with life. They're evidence of depth, of feeling, of being so genuinely engaged with the world that it moves you, literally moves you to tears. And that's not something to fix, it's something to honour. Yes, it's inconvenient. Yes, it's embarrassing sometimes. Yes, it would be easier if you could control it. But it's also beautiful. It means you're alive to your experiences in ways that many people aren't. that you're feeling fully instead of halfway, that you're letting life touch you instead of keeping it at arm's length. So tonight, if you're someone who cries easily, if tears are already forming just from reading words that see you, know this: you are not too much, you are not too sensitive, you are not broken, you are deeply feeling, profoundly human, courageously open to experiences that others protect themselves from. Your tears are not weakness. They're proof that you haven't hardened yourself against the world, that you've stayed soft in a world that demands hardness, that you've remained open in a culture that rewards closure. And that takes more strength than most people will ever understand. So cry when you need to, without apology, without shame, without fighting against your own nature. Your tears are telling the truth, and truth, even when it's uncomfortable, is always worth honouring.